There is a weapon sitting in Turkey's arsenal right now that defense analysts are calling one of the most destructive conventional bombs ever built. And the world is not paying nearly enough attention to what it means. Its name is Gazap. That word in Turkish means wrath. And when you understand what this weapon actually does, when you sit with the technical specifications that defense engineers have put into this thing, you start to understand that the name is not an exaggeration. It is a promise. Weighing in at 970 kilograms, the Gazap generates heat of up to 3,000 degrees Celsius, enough to melt steel and concrete. It releases 10,000 controlled fragmentation particles across a 1-kilometer radius, creating a kill zone of almost incomprehensible scale, and produces shockwaves accompanied by a smoke cloud spanning 160 meters. Defense experts, people who study weapons for a living, people who are not given to exaggeration, describe it as a weapon just short of nuclear capability, pushing the very limits of conventional warfare. And Turkey just unveiled it to the world, publicly, proudly, at an international defense fair, while tensions with Israel are at a historic boiling point. That is not a coincidence. That is a message. And if you want to understand what is really shifting in the Middle East right now, not just the headlines, but the tectonic plates moving underneath all of it, you have to understand what Turkey is doing, why it is doing it, and what it means for every single one of us. So let's go back to where this story really starts. Because this is one of those stories where you cannot understand the present without understanding the past. And the past here is long and complicated and deeply, deeply human. Turkey and Israel were not always adversaries. For decades after World War II and after Israel's founding in 1948, these two countries had a quiet but real relationship. They shared intelligence. They did military exercises together. Back in the 1990s, they were actually allies. Think about that for a second. Two countries that today treat each other as strategic threats were, within the lifetime of many people watching this video right now, working together. Turkey was a Muslim-majority nation that had formal diplomatic and military ties with the Jewish state. It was genuinely one of the more remarkable relationships in the modern Middle East. And then slowly, and then all at once, it fell apart. The deterioration has been happening for years, accelerating with each crisis, each war, each political pivot from Ankara. But the collapse, the real, undeniable structural collapse, kicked into a completely new gear after Hamas's October 7th, 2023 attacks and Israel's subsequent military campaign in Gaza. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who had already been moving Turkey away from its secular, Western-aligned roots for years, found in the Gaza war a cause that allowed him to fully break with whatever remained of the old relationship. He began calling Israel a terror state. He compared Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to Adolf Hitler. He positioned himself as the champion of the Palestinian people in a way that was not just rhetorical, it was strategic. He was making a choice about what kind of regional power Turkey would be, and that choice has consequences that reach far beyond rhetoric. Because here is the thing about Erdogan. He is many things, but he is not impulsive. Every dramatic statement he makes is connected to a longer plan. Every gesture of outrage is accompanied by a concrete policy move. By August of 2025, Turkey had completely shut its ports to Israeli ships, closed its airspace to Israeli government flights and any aircraft transporting arms or ammunition to Israel, and formally severed all trade with Israel. These are not the actions of a country venting frustration. These are the actions of a country reorganizing its entire strategic posture. These are the kinds of moves that you make when you have decided that the relationship is over. Not paused, not strained, but over. And when you are preparing for what comes next. And what comes next is where the Gazap bomb enters the picture. In late July 2025, Turkish defense contractors used the International Defense Industry Fair, known as IDF, to showcase the latest additions to the country's arsenal. Headlining the event were the Typhoon Block 4 ballistic missile and the Gazap and Hayalet bunker buster bombs. President Erdogan was there in person. He gave a speech. He declared that what the world was witnessing was not just the development of the Turkish defense industry, but the march of a nation toward independence, a country rising under its own sky, on its own wings. Now, that is the kind of language that sounds like poetry at a defense fair, but means something very specific in geopolitical terms. It means We no longer need to buy weapons from you. We no longer need your approval. We no longer need to ask permission. We are building our own tools of power, and we are going to use them as we see fit. And the scope of what Turkey has built is genuinely staggering to look at. Turkey's defense sector now comprises more than 3,500 companies, employs over 100,000 people, and generates an annual turnover exceeding $20 billion. Erdogan has claimed that Turkey now produces approximately 80% of its own military needs domestically. That is an extraordinary transformation for a country that, just a few decades ago, was heavily dependent on outside suppliers. Turkey's push for a self-reliant defense industry actually dates all the way back to the 1970s, when the United States imposed a years-long arms embargo on Turkey following its 1974 invasion of Cyprus. That freeze cut off spare parts and key systems for Turkey's military, and it left a wound in the Turkish national psyche that never fully healed. The lesson Ankara took from that moment was simple and lasting. Dependency is vulnerability. If you want to be a truly sovereign power, you have to make your own weapons. And for 50 years, with accelerating intensity under Erdogan's leadership, that is exactly what Turkey has been doing. So when Erdogan stands at IDEF 2025 and unveils the Gazap bomb and the Typhoon missile, he is not just showing off. He is completing a strategic narrative that has been building for half a century. He is saying, look what we have become, look what we can do, and look who is within range. Because that last part matters enormously. Both the Gazap bomb and the Typhoon missile, which the Turkish military could soon deploy, could threaten targets inside the territories of Israel, Greece, and Cyprus, neighbors that already view Ankara's ambitions with deep suspicion. Israel is now within the strike radius of Turkey's growing arsenal. Greece is within range. Cyprus is within range. Analysts note that Turkey's overseas basing agreements, including a military presence in Somalia and its existing forces in northern Cyprus, position it to threaten Israel from multiple axes. The addition of these new weapon systems sharpens what analysts describe as a perceived encirclement. Now, let's be precise here, because precision matters when we are talking about war and peace and the possibility of conflict. Analysts are careful to note that a direct military clash between Turkey and Israel remains unlikely, at least right now. Turkey is a NATO member. Israel is one of America's closest allies. The geographic and political constraints on direct conflict are real and significant. But here is what those same analysts also tell you. The direction of travel is deeply alarming. And direction of travel in geopolitics is often more important than current position. Turkey-Israel relations have entered one of their most tense periods in years, triggered by a series of regional developments that have transformed the two countries' post-Gaza diplomatic crisis into a full-blown geopolitical confrontation. Think about what that language means when it comes from serious foreign policy analysts. A diplomatic crisis becoming a geopolitical confrontation. That is the kind of language that precedes the kind of events that reshape the world. And it is not just Gaza anymore. That is crucial to understand. The deterioration stems not just from Israel's war in Gaza, but also from its expanding footprint across the region. Turkey's concerns have been sharpened by Israel's 12-day multi-front assault on Iranian territory, its repeated strikes on Syria, which Turkey increasingly views as a protected client, and, most significantly, its September 2025 attack on the Hamas delegation in Qatar, Ankara's closest regional ally. That Qatar strike is a moment worth pausing on because it tells you so much about how dramatically the Middle East has changed. Israel struck Hamas figures inside Qatar. Qatar, a country that is simultaneously a major United States military base and one of Turkey's closest allies. Think about the complexity of that. Think about what it means that Israel felt both the need and the freedom to conduct that strike. And think about what it meant for Erdogan, who woke up to news that Israeli forces had hit a delegation operating out of the country he considers his most important regional partner. After that strike, Turkey began to openly worry that it could be next. That fear, whether warranted or not, changes calculations. It changes what kind of weapons you build, what kind of alliances you seek, and what kind of messages you send at international defense fairs. Turkey's moves in Syria add yet another layer of tension to all of this. In September 2025, Ankara began training Syrian forces, and signaled its readiness to provide military assistance and air defense support, with the ultimate aim of establishing its own military bases in Syria to help stabilize the country and extend Turkish influence. Israel, however, has repeatedly and preemptively struck prospective basing sites, for example, hitting airfields such as the former T4 facility, effectively attempting to block a durable Turkish military presence in Syria. So you have two of the most capable military forces in the region actively working at cross purposes inside a third country that is still recovering from a devastating civil war. Turkey is trying to build a strategic military foothold in Syria. Israel is bombing the runways and facilities before Turkey can use them. Each side believes it is acting defensively. Each side believes the other is the aggressor. And when two countries with serious military capabilities and deep historical grievances both believe they are defending themselves from the other, you have created the conditions for accidents to become incidents and incidents to become crises. Now, step back with me for a moment and look at the bigger picture. Because this Turkey-Israel story does not exist in isolation. It is part of a fundamental reshuffling of the entire Middle Eastern order, and that reshuffling has enormous implications for the United States. For decades, American foreign policy in the Middle East was built on a relatively stable set of assumptions. Turkey was a reliable NATO ally. Israel was a close partner. The Arab states were either allied with Washington or at least manageable. Iran was the primary threat. Russia was present but contained. China was far away. Those assumptions are now crumbling one by one, and the Gazap bomb is one of the clearest symbols of that crumbling. Turkey's defense sector has expanded into one of the world's largest, and the development of homegrown tanks, submarines, combat ships, helicopters, and Turkey's fifth-generation stealth fighter, the Khan, which Ankara claims is in testing, represents real, tangible progress. This is not a country that is rattling sabers it cannot back up. This is a country that has spent 50 years building the industrial and technological capacity to fight a serious war on its own terms. And it is a country that is now clearly, deliberately, and systematically positioning itself as a regional hegemon, a country that intends to dominate the Eastern Mediterranean and play a defining role in the future of the Middle East. The question for Americans watching all of this is, what does it mean for us? And the answer is layered and uncomfortable. On one level, Turkey is still technically our NATO ally. American troops are still stationed at Incirlik Air Base in Turkey. America and Turkey still cooperate, however uncomfortably, in a range of institutional settings. But the relationship has been hollowing out for years, and the gap between the formal alliance and the actual strategic alignment is now enormous. At the same time, Israel's security, which America has committed to guaranteeing, is being directly challenged in new ways by a country that is supposed to be on America's team. The Gazap bomb, the Typhoon missile, the shutdown of Turkish airspace and ports to Israeli traffic, the Turkish military maneuvering in Syria, all of these are moves made by a NATO member that are directly threatening to a close American ally. Washington does not have a clean answer to that contradiction. It has been managing it awkwardly for years, and the management is getting harder as Turkey gets more capable and more assertive. There is also the question of global moral norms and the laws of war. Although thermobaric weapons like the Gazap are not banned under international law, their devastating humanitarian impact has sparked global debate, especially regarding civilian safety in conflict zones. We are living through a period when the norms that were supposed to constrain how wars are fought are under enormous pressure everywhere you look. When a country proudly unveils a weapon described as just short of nuclear capability and frames it as a national achievement, something important is being communicated about the direction the world is moving. The taboos are eroding, the lines are blurring, and the countries that have the most to lose from that erosion, which includes the United States and all the democracies it is aligned with, are not doing nearly enough to push back. Because here is the thing. What you are watching in the Eastern Mediterranean right now is not just a bilateral dispute between Turkey and Israel. It is a window into the new world that is being built. a world where middle powers with serious military capabilities feel free to challenge the established order, a world where alliances are transactional and ideological alignment is secondary to national interest, a world where weapons of terrifying destructive capacity are developed, displayed, and named for divine wrath, not as a deterrent, but as a statement of ambition. The Gazap bomb did not appear out of nowhere. It is the product of 50 years of deliberate national effort, of political will, of strategic patience, and of a deep, abiding conviction on the part of Turkey's leadership that the country's rightful place is as a dominant regional power, not a subordinate member of a Western-led order. Erdogan believes that history is on his side. He believes that the American-dominated world order is in decline, that the old alliances are weakening, and that the window for Turkey to claim its place in a new multipolar world is right now. Whether he is right about that is the question that will define the next decade of Middle Eastern history. And the answer will determine not just the fate of Turkey and Israel, but the fate of the entire region and the future of the American role in it. That is what the Gazap bomb is really about. That is the story underneath the story. And it is one that every single person who cares about where this world is headed needs to be paying attention to.